that dream? No, it doesn't have to be that way. What will it take to make you believe the change is coming? I know the change is coming. It's coming. I know the change is coming. Not saying we have to step back if someone is causing too many problems. We need to stand for the truth now, and I have no doubt that the path is lit for those who say that it doesn't have to be that way. I will not believe that I'm the only. I never seen a real rainbow. I still believe though. Gotta believe though. It hurts me when people are fighting different street sides. Words cut like sharp knives. But it doesn't have to be that way. I will not believe that I'm the only one who has that dream. No, it doesn't have to be that way. What will it take to make you believe the change is coming? I know the change is coming. It's coming. I know the change is coming. Not saying we have to step back if someone is causing too many problems. We need to stand for the truth now, and I have no doubt that the path is lit for those who say that it doesn't have to be that way. I will not believe that I'm the only one who has that dream. No, it doesn't have to be that way. What will it take to make you believe the change is coming? I know the change is coming. It's coming. I know the change
afternoon, comrades, sisters, daughters. Welcome to our week 8, where we are discussing or learning from the other councils. We're in an advantageous position in that when we establish our council, we would learn from 2 other councils in the country, NEDLEC and SENEC, which have been in existence for over 15 years. But before we start, I'm trying to check how many people we have. We're just going to start and observe a minute silence for the departed souls. It's been a difficult 5 months. Meditate for the ease of grief for people among us who have lost loved ones or who have people who are sick. So I'm going to do a quick countdown. Right. Thank you. We wish all of you healing and strength as we continue into the unknown. Okay. My name is Nontsikelelo. I work for NUMSA full-time. I'm the moderator for this session. The presenter is Nontsikelelo Mpulo, who works for Section 27. Nontsikelelo has promised to speak slowly but deeply on the experiences. So we'll let Nontsikelelo do the presentation. We will stop at some stage and take comments on the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat with the help of Kay in the background. I now hand over to Nontsikelelo.
Thank you, Sis Ntokozo, and thanks to everybody who's joined us today. Today we're going to be looking at the lessons that we can learn from other councils as we deliberate on the setting up of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So in relation to what we're going to be doing, we're going to be reviewing the pillars of the National Strategic Plan for GBV, and then we're going to review the structure of the National Council and then consider the lessons from NEDLAC and SENEC. What we're hoping to get out of this, and hopefully that you will be able to get out of this, is understanding the structure of the other council and then using the lessons from those councils to make recommendations on how we build our National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So let us start with the beginning, where we want to get to in terms of our National Council. We want it to be principle driven. So the principles that will guide the implementation of our National Strategic Plans programs are the following. There are about 10 of them, but I will go through the ones that I think that are most pertinent for the discussion today. We want a multi-sectoral approach to optimally harness the roles, responsibilities, resources, and commitments across government departments, different tiers of government, society, civil society, movements, youth structures, development agencies, the private sector, academic institutions, and all stakeholders. And we don't want to start reinventing the wheel, because we know that there has been a lot of work done around GBV in this country. And so we want to complement and augment existing strategies, instruments, and national initiatives on GBV and femicide and overall safety in the country. Key for us is the active and meaningful participation of communities and civil society movements, and those most affected by GBV in the design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of our strategic plan. Our plan must be visionary, it is gender responsive, and has a transformative approach that takes into account inequality and the gender differences driving gender-based violence and femicide in this country, and especially for men to transform. And that is one of the key drivers of our National Strategic Plan, is that men must be part of the conversation. We want the principles, our national strategic plan, to be a human rights-based document, and that is a survivor-centered, that has a survivor-centered approach to the provision of the services that reach all without the risk of financial hardship. And we'll talk more about that in later stages. One of the key also issues around our GBV and our National Council for GBV is mutual accountability for changes, recognizing that meeting these outcomes requires both all government, civil society, communities, social movements, and the private sector and development partners and all stakeholders to work together to drive the agenda forward. And inclusiveness and embracing diversity and intersectionality, recognizing the importance of being rooted in women's experiences, those who are most marginalized by poverty, race, age, disability, sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender identity, and nationality. So those are the basic principles on which we have put forward for our National Council and our National Strategic Plan. And based on this, we will look at these two councils that have taken this similar approaches. As we've said, it's the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC, and the South African National AIDS Council. They both have policies and legislation that mandate the inclusion of civil society in decision-making structures. And what we want to evaluate today is whether these two councils have successfully met these mandates and what lessons we can take from what they've done in the last 15 years. But before we do that, let's briefly review the pillars of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide and the proposed structure of the National Council. We've discussed these in previous webinars, so I won't go into too much detail around them, but I do want us to remember what we had said that we wanted to achieve. So in relation to Pillar 1, which talks to accountability, coordination, and leadership, we said that we wanted bold leadership, strengthened accountability across government and society, that responds to GBV and femicide strategically with clear messaging and adequate technical and financial resources. We said that we wanted a strengthened multi-sectoral coordination and collaboration across different tiers of government and sections of society based on relationships of trust that give effect to the pillars of the National Strategic Plan. I mean, our 10-year outcome, what we want to see as we move forward in the next 10 years is that all living in South Africa, including government, the private sector, workplaces, schools, religious and cultural institutions are held accountable for building a safe and GBV-free environment. And that is really, really key because that is where we bring all sectors of society into the discussion. And we're not just having women railing against men, but that we are all participating in the discussion about how we end the scourge in our country as equal partners. In terms of Pillar 2, we said that we wanted to, Pillar 2 addresses prevention and rebuilding social cohesion. We said that we wanted a strengthening of delivery capacity in South Africa to roll out effective prevention programs. We want changed behavior and social norms within key groups as a result of the rollout of evidence-based prevention interventions. And we want shifts away from toxic masculinity towards embracing positive alternative approaches to expressing masculinities and other sexual and gender identities within specific communities and groups. And this is a key one of the pillar of prevention and social cohesion. And so as we think about that, we also have talked about how the justice and sector must be responsive to survivors of gender-based violence, but building on the pillar of the second pillar around prevention, we need to ensure that men and young boys are brought into the discussion around that before we get to even discussing pillar 3 around justice, safety, and protection. But around that particular pillar, we said that we want all GBV survivors to be able to access effective and sensitive criminal justice that is quick, accessible, responsive, and gender inclusive. We said we wanted strengthened capacity within the criminal justice system to address all impunity, effectively respond to femicide, and facilitate justice for GBV survivors. We said we wanted amended legislation related to GBV areas that build on legislative reforms initiated under the Emergency Response Action Plan. And we've seen the Department of Justice has already tabled 3 bills that will help to do that, and we need to engage with that process quite robustly in order to make sure that they do indeed deal with the issues of survivors in the way that is helpful to them, which then leads us to the discussion around Pillar 4, which is the response, care, support, and healing for survivors of gender-based violence. In this pillar, we said we wanted strengthened existing response, care, and support services by the state and civil society in ways that are victim-centered and survivor-focused to facilitate recovery and healing. We said that we wanted secondary victimization eliminated through addressing specific individual and systemic factors that are driving it. And we said that we want victims to feel supported by the system to access the necessary psychosocial, material, and other support required to assist them in their healing. Now, one of the key factors of our national strategic plan, which is different from others, is with that it is putting women at the center in relation to economic power, and that is addressed in Pillar 5. We said that we wanted accelerated initiatives that address women's unequal economic and social position through access to government and private sector procurement, employment, housing, and access to land, and financial resources and income generating initiatives. We said we wanted safe workplaces that are free of violence against women and LGBTQIA persons, including but not limited to sexual harassment. And we wanted demonstrated commitment through policy interventions by the state, by private sectors, and other stakeholders to eliminate the impact of the economic drivers that drive GBV. And then one of the most important ones of the pillars is the research and information management pillar, which will drive all 5 of the other pillars, because we need information in order to, as we say, implement evidence-based prevention programs, for example. So we said that we wanted improved understanding of the extent and nature of gender-based violence broadly and in relation to specific groups and forms in South Africa. We said we wanted the adoption of GBV policies and programs and interventions that are informed by existing evidence-based research. And then we said that we wanted GBV-related information across different government and management information systems that is readily available to be used to address the systematic challenges that facilitate effective solutions and responses. And in order to do this, we have proposed that we set up our GBV Council in this way. As with others, as you will see in later on in the presentation, that we need political support at the highest level, and so we felt that the GBV, the National Strategic Plan, ought to be housed in the Office of the Presidency, that there's an executive board which is comprised of members of civil society and members of the interministerial committee, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and how we then cascade that down to provincial government and also to local government in municipalities. We also outlined what the responsibilities of each of these participants. And what this organogram doesn't give us at the moment is how private sector contributes to the organogram, but we can talk about that as we make recommendations around how the NSP is implemented. What we said we wanted in our NSP is that government has the responsibility to align strategic plans and existing programs with the outcomes and outputs of the NSP. We said we wanted to allocate budgets for the respective pillars, and we wanted government to ensure that the allocation of funding and resources at national, provincial, and local government local levels is done. We want governments to resource and enhance the capacity of structures and human resources for the effective implementation of our plan. And we want government to facilitate the necessary intergovernmental relations between national, provincial, and local to facilitate effective implementation, and also to integrate the M&E systems that are existing across the government-wide framework. The departments that are going to be involved in this, we identified as the Department of Women, Youth, and People Living with Disabilities, the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, National Treasury, COGTA, and so those are the key departments, but there will be others that will be like the Department of Justice, as we will see a little bit later on. In terms of the role of civil society organizations, we said that civil society structures will co-convene the National Council and provide direction and leadership based on the key issues emanating from their constituencies. And this will include advocating and promoting the implementation of the resourcing of the National Strategic Plan, developing targeted messages to address social and economic cultural drivers to the realization of the autonomy of women, children, and LGBTQI persons. Civil society ought to support the capacity development processes across respective sectors and ensure that communities and those affected by these issues are integrally involved in the design and rollout of programs, amongst other things. And then in terms of the private sector, we said that it should support local, provincial, and national actions to implement the National Strategic Plan through direct funding and public-private partnerships, and that it must play an active role in ensuring that workplaces become active platforms to prevent and to respond to gender-based violence. So what can we learn from these councils that we've identified, having understood what we want to achieve with our council? So we've said that civil society participation is good because it has the potential to ensure accountability of the state regarding public funds, and that South Africa has adopted the civil society participation ideologically in governments as a way of promoting transparency, accountability, and efficiency in government activities. Now that is the principle on which we want to operate. Whether or not it actually happens, we will see whether NEDLAC and SANAC have achieved this. So looking at how NEDLAC is constituted, we'll base it on the history in which South Africa has based the idea of public participation. So we'll see that since 1994, government has instituted a series of activities and interventions to ensure that civil society participates. The Izimbizo are gatherings in which political leadership holds public meetings to engage communities on issues of government policies and service deliveries. EXCO Meets the People is looking at initiatives at provincial level in relation to public hearings, which we participate in on various levels. And during this lockdown period, we've done so in webinars. However, we need to just unpack and deliberate on how these public meetings are constituted and what gets presented in there, and how civil society actually participates in public hearings as we go forward in deliberating around our national strategic plan. In terms of other engagements, there's ward committees, however successful they are at local municipality level. There's community development workers, there's citizen satisfaction surveys, and there's the NEDLAC and the National Anti-Corruption Forum. What we want to focus on now is how NEDLAC works. So the NEDLAC model has its foundation. Sorry, I'm just going to move this out of the way. In the corporatist social dialogue model of the International Labour Organization. And it involves negotiation, consultation, and exchange of information between or among representatives of government, employers, workers on issues of common interest relating to economic policy and social policy. The mandate of NEDLAC is quite extensive. There are about 6 areas that they focus on, but for our interests, I want to talk about the involvement of NEDLAC in legislation and around the formulation of policy. So NEDLAC considers all proposed labor legislation relating to the labor market policy before it gets implemented in Parliament. And it also encourages and promotes the formulation of coordinated policy around social and economic matters. For us as a key learning is that we need to be part of the development of legislation. And so the 3 bills that are being mooted around gender-based violence, we need to take active steps to engage with the bills and also to comment on them as they become publicly available. And this is why, much to Mambuni's frustration, I was sharing the discussion that the Deputy Minister of Justice was having around these bills, because I felt it was important for us to be able to know what he's saying and what the proposed bills are saying, so that we can make inputs on it. The other thing is that as these bills become legislation, and we will have talked about it in a previous webinar, that there is policy or regulations that will emanate from there. And so we also must be part of the discussion around the development of policies. In terms of the structure of NEDLAC, it's quite similar to what we have envisaged as the structure of our council, in that there is an executive council, which is the highest decision-making body of NEDLAC, and it has 18 members from all the chambers. And you'll see that there's various chambers that make inputs on the development of policy. These chambers are the Development Policy Chamber, the Trade and Industry Chamber, the Public Finance and Monetary Policy Chamber, and the Labour Market Chamber. And so the National Council or the Executive Council, that is, comprises these members from these coordinates the work of these chambers as well, along with the management committee. It meets at least 4 times a year to evaluate the progress and reach consensus and ratify agreements that come out of the chamber. The structure of the chambers is intended to facilitate negotiation, develop and reach consensus, and conclude agreements and evaluate associated institutions of delivery. Where we come in is around the community constituency. And the community constituency was selected by NEDLAC through a criteria defined in the NEDLAC Act of 1994, which requires that prospective organizations meet 3 criteria. They must represent a significant interest on a national scale, have a direct interest in reconstruction and development, and be democratically constituted. So each organization in the community constituency will have an overall community convener who is responsible for positioning the interests of community members. The constituency is only represented in the development chamber of NEDLAC. So for us, it's important to note that we need to build a mechanism for consensus building amongst the community constituencies, because as we know from the mobilization that we've been doing in the last few months and in the 2 years since the march, that there's various capacities for participation in national structures. And so we need to build the capacity from community level. One of the three key issues from the way in which communities participate at NEDLAC I've wanted to outline are the following. The representation of the community constituencies. Civil society, civic organizations, women's organizations, youth organizations, rural development forums, disabled people's organizations, all of these constitute a very large part or sector of our society, but they have limited representation in the community constituency at NEDLAC. And they're seen as an outsider in the social dialogue process. And so as we look to developing our national council, we need to ensure that the principle outlined in the NSP of inclusivity finds expression in the mechanism that we put in place to ensure the participation of all sectors of our communities. The second issue around community participation was the extent to which communities participate. So as I outlined, there are 4 different chambers that work at NEDLAC, and the community constituency only has representation in the development chamber. The management community committee and the executive committee also have representation in the other sectors, but communities are only represented in the development sector, which means that we do not contribute to issues discussed in the labor market chamber, that in the public finance and monetary policy chamber, and in the trade and industry chamber, there is no representation. So as we go forward in developing our national council, we need to make sure that civil society or community representation, there is a space for us in all decision-making structures. And finally, I want to look at the level of participation, or at least the ability of the community constituency to participate at NEDLAC. There is agreement-making process in NEDLAC, which makes it difficult for various organizations to get mandates or to arrive at common positions with their members. And the inclusion of so many organizations also makes it difficult for the community constituency to arrive at common positions. And thus, this hinders the engagement process. So as we deliberate our national council, we need to look at the financial resources and knowledge sharing that we're able to facilitate in order to continue to allow people to have access to information and to participate fully in the decision-making structures of our national council. And at this moment, then, I think we're going to take a 5-second break. There will be a poll, as I understand it.
Hi, Kay, are you helping with the poll?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Nsigi. We're just going to, yeah.
At the beginning of the AIDS pandemic, or epidemic rather, the World Bank multi-country AIDS program was launched in 2000, and one of the conditions of the grant was that countries should develop a multi-sectoral plan around HIV and AIDS. And it was recognized at the time that there's evidence that shows that countries like Uganda and Senegal have controlled the spread and reduced the prevalence of HIV through a multi-sectoral plan. And we have said in the development of our national strategic plan that a multi-sectoral way of doing it is the way to go. And so looking at that, also the influence of UNAIDS, the global body, as the way we engage with UN Women. UNAIDS gave guidelines around HIV, and they said that they wanted 3 principles. 1, an agreed plan, an agreed HIV in action framework that provides the basis for coordinated work of all partners. 1, a national AIDS coordinating authority with broad multi-sector mandate, and 1 agreed country-level monitoring and evaluation system with the aim of encouraging concerted action on HIV and AIDS at a national level and harmonizing donor interventions. And this is how this was the precursor of SANEC, which is the National AIDS Plan, or at least the NSP for AIDS and HIV. The National AIDS Plan was developed under the leadership of the National AIDS Convention of South Africa in 1994, and it was the first broad-based and inclusive plan to guide the response to HIV and AIDS in South Africa. Unfortunately, the recommendations made in the National AIDS Plan were never implemented. Instead, the response to HIV and AIDS was placed under the ambit of the National Health Department and within a narrow and biomedical framework where a national AIDS program director was employed to oversee the implementation of the NAP. The 9 South African provinces followed the lead from the national government and placed HIV and AIDS within their respective provincial plan departments of health. This process involved reassigning people from elsewhere in the civil service to work as provincial AIDS coordinators rather than recruiting from the extensive pool of AIDS activists who were believed to have valuable knowledge and understanding about HIV in the community experiencing HIV. The roles and responsibilities for developing and implementing plans at both national and provincial levels were unclear, and with district structures still developing at that time. As a result, implementation was characterized by multiple parallel activities lacking in coherence and continuity within government and between government and civil society. This is something that we need to guard against as we develop plans for the implementation of the National Strategic Plan for GBV. So moving on from the National AIDS Plan, then we came to the development of the National Strategic Plan for HIV in 2000 to 2005. And this one reiterated the key principles of cooperation and inclusion that were included in the original NAP, with a focus on establishing national multi-sectoral coordinating structure, which was then called SANEC. For the first time, provinces and districts and local government were given the critical role of acting as implementing agencies for the NSP, and the envisaged model was that the national multi-sectoral level structure would be replicated at provincial, district, and local levels to achieve effective and a coordinated program. And this is the model that drives the current plan for 2017-2021. Civil society participation in the structure is across these sectors. And as we have said, that inclusivity, it talks to people living with HIV and those who are affected by living with HIV. And so it is as broad-based as possible and tries to address as many of the sectors that are affected as possible. And so it's a good learning for us as we develop our plan to be inclusive. In terms of its mandate, SANEC provides policy advice to government. It advocates for the multi-sectoral engagement that we've been talking about. It monitors the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. It creates and strengthens, or ought to create and strengthen, strategic partnerships. And it is supposed to mobilize resources for the implementation of AIDS programs and also make recommendation around HIV and AIDS research. So this very much mirrors the kind of pillars that we have outlined in our strategic plan. So ideally, AIDS councils at any level should provide a platform and facilitate collaboration between sectors with an intention to improve synergies, reduce fragmentation of action, and decrease the duplication of HIV programs, which we talked about, and interventions aimed towards meeting the goals of the NSP. So as with SANEC, the provincial, district, and local AIDS councils are meant to comprise members representing civil society, government, and the private sector. And the following figure outlines the roles and responsibilities described above, how things work. So ideally, the community develops, or at least based on community interaction, the local AIDS council develops and develops the plan and reports on progress on the response to HIV by multiple stakeholders, and it is then escalated to the district. The district consolidates reports from local AIDS councils and reports progress on the district response to the provincial AIDS council. And then the AIDS council at provincial level reports to the National AIDS Council. The National AIDS Council then oversees the development of the National Strategic Plan and also supports the implementation process at provincial, district, and local AIDS councils. And so it's a bottom-up versus a top-down, because as we said, that we need to have evidence-based interventions, and so it must be rooted in the experiences of the community. And ideally, this is how the National AIDS Council has been run, or at least that is what it looks like in policy. In terms of the findings of this research paper, I'm going to go through now what the authors of the study found when they were looking at district and local AIDS councils. So in terms of the composition of the councils, they found that most district and local AIDS councils did not consist of representatives from all three sectors. Examples of civil society participating in AIDS councils included community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and NGOs, but there was limited participation from government departments and a notable absence of the private sector. They also found that membership of AIDS councils is voluntary with no financial benefit for participation. And this led to a lack of commitment and a membership that was constantly changing. So for us, as we go forward in deliberating around how we implement our national strategic plan at local and district level, we must make sure that there is consistent participation of civil society in all sectors. In terms of the operating procedures of AIDS councils, the authors of the study found there was no evidence of guidelines to inform the establishment of AIDS councils, other than a small mention in the NSP in 2012-2016, that there will be a clear guiding framework to support implementation and to set out expected roles and responsibilities. So while some AIDS councils were constituted and had planned meetings, others were, one, not constituted, and B, had ad hoc meetings when the need arose, and they were mainly driven by the municipal and HIV and AIDS programs. A review of the documents that were supplied showed that the highest number of meetings that the AIDS councils had were about 3 times a year. And some AIDS councils had only met once or twice in the previous years. And these meetings happened in an ad hoc manner. So as we look at the way that we write out the regulations, rules that govern our national council at local and provincial level, we need to avoid the same kinds of issues. We need to have that framework in place. So the other issue around the operating procedures was that many representatives of the AIDS councils or AIDS councils members don't have decision-making powers in their own organizations. And so they were unable to suggest different ways of working to improve the synergies with other organizations in the AIDS councils. And some of them were sending different people at different times, different meetings. And so for us, we need to make sure that those who participate in our GBV councils must have the mandate from their organizations and must be consistent in attending meetings. The next issue that they identified in the research was around the capacity to coordinate the multi-sectoral approach. And this, for me, is a key finding. They found that all AIDS councils had appointed HIV coordinators who were employed and paid for by the respective municipality, and that their role included being the secretariat of the AIDS Council with the responsibility of driving the process to bring members together to facilitate and oversee the development of the implementation plan with activities and timeframes aligned to the National Strategic Plan, and also to monitor and evaluate progress against the plan and to report to the higher level structure. The key finding around this was that most of those who were hired as HIV coordinators were just too junior. They didn't have the necessary skills. They didn't have the confidence to effectively design and deliver robust HIV activities. And so for us, a key learning is that whomever we advocate to get appointed must have the requisite skills, and if they don't, they must receive training and be supported to effectively fulfill their roles, because they will be our representatives or our interface with the government structures. Another key development, or at least finding of the research, was that around political leadership and support on the HIV response, that it was completely different across the different AIDS councils. At national level, the deputy president of the country at the time, and it is as now, I'm not sure whether it's the same, but when Cyril Ramaphosa was deputy president, he was actively involved as the chairperson of SANAC. His leadership role was evident in public platforms and where he spoke openly about HIV and AIDS and advocated for the multi-sectoral approach. In contrast, though, there's a lack of political leadership in some district and some local AIDS councils. While some coordinators were political appointees, strategically located in the office of the mayor, and others were located in community service departments, and they struggled to get the much needed political support of the mayor. Another issue of the lack of commitment from the political leadership is that if the mayor doesn't convene meetings, then meetings do not happen, and therefore there is a lack of implementation. And so for us, a key learning is that local coordinators must be situated in positions in order to be able to get the job done, and also they must have the political clout to make sure that the work gets completed. Finally, and one of the key findings of the research is around financial resources. A central issue that was highlighted at provincial level was that the activities listed in the implementation plan were unfunded, and as a result, they just remained a wish list. Members of the local AIDS council spoke about the variation in the budgets allocated to AIDS councils by district and local municipalities. They emphasized that some municipalities didn't prioritize HIV and AIDS in their budgets at all. And other issues that were identified at national level was that inaccurate cost estimation and budgeting and poor tracking of the contribution of the private sector meant that the funding for the programs was inadequate. And so for us, as we deliberate our national council, we need to make sure that there is sufficient resourcing, not only from a human resource perspective, but also from a financial perspective. So one observation that I have made is that a major criticism of South Africa's planning and implementation is that we write good policy documents, but we fail to implement them. The National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide is an important and well-written document, but it is incumbent on those of us working in the sector to ensure that it is well-funded and implemented. And so next week, we will look at the GBV fund. And as we do that, we need to make sure that it is able to, we are able to implement the strategic interventions outlined in the NSP by having sufficient money to make sure that we do that. And thank you very much. That is me complete.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Nontsikelelo. I have been following comments from participants on both on Facebook. I haven't gotten any direct ones on the chat on GoToMeetings. I'm going to assume that at the moment we are all content with the principles that we identified for the NSP, for ourselves as the civil society. There are more questions on how do we maintain the relationship, how do we become effective. So I hope that, I think it's Megan Pillay, I hope that in my comments, I will cover some of your comments. The reason that we looked at the two existing councils was that we could avoid their weaknesses. We could learn from them. We are fortunate in that some of the activists who participate in NEDLEC and participate in SENEC also participate in this collective. So it's going to be a continuous learning for all of us. The questions that we ask of government equally apply to us. We should also avoid bickering within us as civil society. One way we could do that is by setting a minimum number of meetings, setting a, well, we call it in trade union language, a term of office for the representative to the council. We can't just say we're sending Umandisa and then the next month it becomes somebody else. There's got to be consistency and learning. So we need to set a term of office. That is in my thinking, because that is one of the highlighted weakness of SANEC and also sometimes of NEDLEC. How do we skill and support our representative? It's one of the issues we have to deal with. We shouldn't be generous with criticism if we cannot prove that we've given our representative enough support in the form of skills, but skills are also incremental. And skills also include giving the necessary support, be it that it's administrative, or sometimes even these meetings can be tense and sometimes psychological because they eat on us. Another issue that we need to address, because it came out clearly in the study, was where do we strategically place the coordinators, right, of the GBV NSP, from local to region to province to national. We know that, let's take in a political party, for you to be effective, you're always better under either the president's office or under the general secretary's office, because that's where there's more political authority. Yes. We also do need to think about, and we shouldn't use this as an exclusionary measure, how do we select people who represent us at the council? And if we've selected people, how do we do a skills audit so that we see where there are urgent skills gaps that need to be addressed immediately and others that we can do later? so that we don't set our own people for failure.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also the government and the private sector need to be held accountable. They cannot choose which meetings they go to. Once they've committed, if we have said that we're going to have 4 meetings per annum, which I'm suggesting maybe that would work, but this is your meeting, this is your discussion, everybody should commit to those. I know that there's often competition about where the meeting is being held. For us, it's important. What is the issue being discussed? How important is it for us? And how also another issue that came for us when we were preparing for this discussion was a lot of organizations that work on GBV are very localized. They don't even have a regional footprint. Yeah. And we should not exclude them because of that. So we have to work out a mechanism of being very inclusive, because if you just take maybe Kamo in Soweto, she doesn't cover the whole of Soweto. And her foundation, the Justice Foundation, shouldn't be excluded on the basis of that, because they do make an impact. And on issues like GBV, really, it works better at a street level sometimes than at a national level. So we need to think carefully about how can we be inclusive. Does the involvement of students at a higher institutions of learning means that all other students are involved? What do we do with issues of intersectionality, which we have been, well, maybe pretty weak on? Yeah, we need to strengthen that. We can't be criticized about excluding women, women as in intersectionality, women who are non-conforming in 2020 as we were in 2018. So I'm just going to let it there. And if, Kay, I'm checking our sideline, whether there are other comments that came through that I did not address. I think
so, Sister Ntokozo, I wanted to pick up on a couple of the points that you made. One, for me, the glaring gap in our national strategic plan is how explicit we have been around the participation of the private sector. We have outlined very robustly what government must do and what civil society must do. But in terms of the private sector, they are, and this is what we said when we went to Sandton, is that they are implicated as well as perpetrators of gender-based violence and the harboring of gender-based violence in relation to the sexual harassment that happens in offices, the exclusion of women in fora and things like that. And so as we deliberate how the National Council is going to function, because we've adopted the National Strategic Plan, we need to write into or bake into the way we operate, bringing the private sector much more into the fold in the discussions that we have around ending GBV, and make them accountable, as we try to do with the JSE process, and which we must take forward, particularly as we talk about the establishment of the GBV fund. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is the issue around the coordinators of our councils. Now, the question about capacity, we must not be bullied, as the government has tried to do in other discussions around who must be in the room when we discuss things like who gets appointed to be a coordinator. When we talk about district and local level, like one of the lessons around that SANAC brought forward was that they did not take into account the experience of HIV activists on the ground when they were implementing at the very, very beginning. And so we mustn't fall into the same trap. we must make sure that people so we have networks in Mpumalanga, we have networks in KZN, and so we must tap into the existing knowledge around GBV that we have in those areas.
Okay, thank you, Nsiki. I do not see any more questions and comments. And I think we do need to put together what came out sharply that we have to strengthen for this particular lesson on other council, and take it back to the bigger collective. Sorry, I'm also trying to check here. Yeah, there are no more questions. And okay, there was one other issue, by the way, that I forgot. That was when you are trusted with sitting in these bodies, one of the issues that is often used against, especially activists, is our failure to account. Not because we're pathetic at accounting, just because we're doing too much work, and some people just leave from moving from one meeting to another, and this is not the only work that you are doing. So we need to also look at the monitoring and evaluation as a major area, because it does seem to be clearing whether those people whether we will find all of those skills in our reps and our coordinators. It's something else, or we have to create another committee like you will do in finance, have an audit committee. Should we have a monitoring and an evaluation committee, so that we're not sitting 5 years later and saying, oh, there was a problem in year 2 of the implementation, but we're only dealing with it in year 5. By then, it has caused too many snowballing effect of problems. And of course, there will be things like disgruntlement and attacking people when we did not point out where things were falling apart at the beginning, and then have a safety net. So I am big on monitoring and evaluation, and I guess almost people who have worked in projects would know that that is important to create credibility with the donors.
Yes, yes. I think that's a very important point you make, Sis Ntokozo, because I mean, what councils ought to be are oversight organs, right? And so what we must ensure as we set up our council is that the technical support that we will need is going to be able to deliver for us on monitoring and evaluation. And as you say, so perhaps we as activists don't have that kind of technical knowledge, but what we do have to have, and that's where training and capacitation has to happen, is that we must be able to ask the right questions to avoid that scenario that you put, Uti, you know, in year 2 there was a problem, and then we're only picking it up in year 5. And so we need to be able to ask the right questions when the wheels start coming off or things start to fall apart, so that we as oversight bodies are able to ensure that not only implementation is happening, but that it's evidence-based and that we are monitoring it effectively.
Okay, there is another comment, and I think it's very helpful. We've learned from COVID.
That's a good point.
The COVID procurement. Will we screen our own people who end up being employed, that they have a clean record, especially in as far as corruption is concerned? So that's another issue that we have to think about.
That's really a very important one. I mean, I was sitting in a discussion yesterday amongst people in the foundations who have been engaging with the ANC top 6, and they are saying that government, it's the role of government to ensure that they do not act in corrupt ways. And so our responsibility as civil society and as participants in this oversight role that we have is that we don't participate in corruption ourselves. We don't facilitate it, and that we whistleblow just as soon as we identify that there is an issue around corruption. But it's endemic. It's almost as endemic as GBV in our country. Perhaps we need a national strategic plan around ending corruption. But in relation to the way that councils work, and you will see that corruption, although it is rife, it's possible to act ethically. And our role as civil society is to identify the opportunities. I mean, to identify the issues as they arise, and to whistleblow. Okay.
Okay. I'm tempted now that we're talking about corruption and how do we make sure that our representatives and people who get employed and sit in the council are not do not have a spot on corruption or have not been dented by corruption. The other area which is very clear, and I'm sure it's been mentioned, we need to be vigilant. No perpetrator of GBV can sit in the council, including those who refuse to maintain their children. Because I mean, if you don't child, I don't know if that is not violent. It's very violent.
It is a form of gender-based violence indeed. And so, yes, absolutely. And so the representatives that we put forward, I mean, we've been very clear in the NSP that we don't want that from government's perspective, but also from our side, we can't make the assumption that the people that will represent us. So we need to be very vigilant about who we appoint to represent us at those national and provincial and local structures.
Okay, there is one last comment from Managa. By the way, it's not last. If you have another one, Managa, you are more than welcome to put in another one. She says, it will be key to look at how multi-sectoral accountability will be measured beyond just the lead departments.
That is entirely true, because as we know, the Department of Health will also have a role to play, and also, you know, as I've said, private sector. And so, in terms of the measuring and the monitoring and evaluation, we need to put in robust tools to make sure that all who are involved are held accountable, ourselves included. That is one of the recommendations I think that we should make when we put forward, you know, so the recommendations and at the end of this series. I don't know what your view would be about multi-sectoral accountability, Sisintokozo. As you work with the unions, you also have structures that are in place to do that. So it'd be interesting to hear what you would have to say about that.
I personally think that we need to define the sectors, because sometimes sectors differ from national. When you get to the local level, they can take a very different format and you lose some. So we need to define it for ourselves. But everybody should be given the same set of minimum accountability or key performance areas that they will be judged against. Yeah. And this doesn't speak only to financial accountability, it speaks to the conduct as well. Yeah.
And how we measure what success looks like.
It's a multi-million-dollar question. I don't have immediate answers, but one of the areas would be the improvement in the police services, how they handle GBV cases, the availability of test kits, the prosecution, the less number of cases that get dropped, the prosecution that is commensurate with the level of crime or the level of violation. And I mean, we just need to make, what's it? We not be shy about that we're a country battling GBV. If it means that that should be what you see at the airport in the big screen with the number for the GBV care line, maybe that should be it. Because that's how we will see by how people access services, the quality of the services, and how content people are. Just last week, was it this week? We were watching polls, so still speaking about a case of 2015, and we shouldn't be about that. Only when there is TV do we get commitment. But when people go individually to the police station, there is no commitment. But we need to go back to the council. How does the council capacitate the structures downstream?
That's a very valid point. I see there's another question or comment coming in about representatives that are sitting in commissions and how we as community members can participate in the nomination process. And I think that that's part of the reason why we've been doing this webinar series, is to bring people on board with what we're trying to achieve in terms of the principles of the NSP, the pillars of the NSP, and also to know what kind of people we want to participate at all levels, local, national, and provincial. And so what we're trying to do is not only capacitate people, but make sure that we know who is in the fold, so that when we do make the nominations, when we do put people forward, we know that there are people who understand what we are trying to achieve and are talking from the same hymn sheet. I don't know if that answers the question that's been placed here on the group, but Sis Ntokozo, you may also have a view.
Okay, I do want to comment on this for simple reason that we need to set up our own mandating procedures. How do we mandate people? What do we require for them to be accountable? Is a report on a website enough, or should we have road shows maybe once a year? And those are the issues that we need to think about. In my previous employer, which was a global organization, there used to be a saying that if you want people not to know about it, put it on a website. Unless I'm specifically looking for that, I will go to the correct tab. Otherwise, when it's on the website, not everybody visits the website, even of their own organization. So we need to find ways of reporting that answers the question, are we being inclusive in our accountability? That will then answer the question, who did we elect? Are they sensitive? Or who did we appoint? Are they sensitive to the sector and the spread of the sector that they represent? We don't have those answers to those questions yet, but we can learn from 2018 to now. How do we improve?
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Sis Boni, I know you miss us. Can we just end it now? Hey. Okay. It does look like myself, Kay, and well, more myself and Siki will have to pull together the points that came out here. One was we need to say very specifically to the public sector, to the private sector, our unhappiness about how they harbor perpetrators, how they undermine gender representation, how they continue not to give. For instance, there should be specific leave for people who are victims of GBV. They can't be taking from their normal annual leave. If GBV is a pandemic and it should be treated so it's a separate kind of leave that the women should benefit from. But also we need to find that for those people who work in the private sector and the public sector, a question need to be asked. Are you a perpetrator of GBV, and would we allow them to go back to work and continue to perpetrate and stop transferring a person from Mpumalanga to KwaZulu-Natal? Because you're transferring the problem. So we do need to hold them accountable, but we also need clear plans about how they are going to work with us in eradicating GBV, but also in financing initiatives on GBV, on eradication of GBV. Those were my final points. And Siki, do you have your final one? Or?
My final one is that I completely agree with your final one. And also to say that the recommendations that come out of this process have got to be really strong, so that when we do establish finally the National Council on GBV and Femicide, that we have the right people who have significant power, not only to be able to withstand the issues that will come, the bullying and the tactics that our government is so well known for, but also to be able to take the mandate that we give them forward to ensure that our strategic plan is implemented and that we do finally see the end of gender-based violence in this country. It's a 10-year vision, and we hope that we will be able to achieve it sooner than that. And that is my final view on that.
Okay, my one is we have a lot of work ahead of us. We cannot afford to fail, but even when we fail, we should be gentle with ourselves and go back and say, how did we fail and how can we avoid the failures going forward? And let us support each other. Councils have a tendency to create fragmentation within bodies that are otherwise united. And bullying also applies to when government will peddle lies about how much they are paying to coordinators and how much allowances. And if we take that information as it is without checking it, it causes fragmentation. A lot of activists do not take anything from government and largely are just doing it out of passion for the work. So let's light up in our corners. And thank you for allowing me to moderate. It's been a learning curve. I'm not a visual person.
It's been a wonderful session talking with you, Sis Ntokozo, as well. Your wealth of experience has actually improved my learning as well, so I appreciate it. And I hope that people who have attended the seminar have gotten as much as I've gotten out of it as well.
Okay, we are signing off. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, all of you who have been pulling the questions for us. See you next time.
See you next time.
Yeah.
I never seen a real rainbow. I still believe though. Gotta believe though. It hurts me when people are fighting. Different street sides. Words cut like sharp knives. But it doesn't have to be that way. I will not believe that I'm the only one who has that dream. No, it doesn't have to be that way. What will it take to make you believe the change is coming? I know the change is coming. It's coming. I know the change is coming. saying we have to step back if someone is causing too many problems. We need to stand for the truth now, and I have no doubt that the path is lit for those who say that it doesn't have to be that way. I will not believe that I'm the